Hello, everyone, and welcome back to World Regional Geography. Here I will focus on the history and culture of East Asia, specifically focusing on Japan and China. When we look at the formation of China as a country, we're going to find that this area between the Yellow River and the Yangtze River is the most important, but especially the central area here along Xi'an and Luoyang, which are very important cities for China's historical development. As you might know, China forms out of several dynasties, and some of the most important are the Qing Dynasty, the Han Empire, these are dynasties or either empires. They're labeled as empires here. I'm just going to call them dynasties: the Qin Dynasty, the Han Dynasty, as well as the Song, Shang, and the Zhou dynasty. And so these form the historic core of historic ancient China. As you can see, the icon here is the Great Wall of China, which existed as a border between Mongolia and those tribes and China here in the south. And Mongolia, of course, this was considered a more of a backward people that China always wanted to keep out from invading China. We also have the Silk Road. The Silk Road, which begins in Luoyang and Xi'an, is one of the most important trade routes, the most important in history in terms of its relationship between East and West. The Qin Dynasty is important because its geographic area extends to the central area of what became China eventually, and it's the formation of the single state and culture. And they didn't start the Great Wall, but they continued to build the Great Wall, and a lot of resources were spent in that. They also imposed uniformity in territory and governance under the Qin Dynasty, and these emperors are also known for the terracotta statues, the terracotta army, and the trade through the Silk Road. The Han Dynasty existed from 206 before the Common Era to 220 AD, and this is considered, it is today's largest ethnic group in China, Han Chinese people, but it is also considered one of the most important dynasties because it organizes the first true-scale East Asian empire in China. It dominates territory equivalent to present-day China. If we look at the map, all this area along the green was dominated by the Han Dynasty. And it also built a large segment of the Great Wall of China. It also exported the writing system, or Chinese writing system, to other countries in East Asia. And it also constructed the Grand Canal, which connected river trade. The Grand Canal is an important waterway that connected the Yellow River, the Yangtze River, and then cities like Beijing and Hangzhou in the south. So this is a handout of the Great Wall of China. It's a map with its period of construction, along with the different dynasties that contributed to its construction. And you can find it in the canvas page. And this is an image of what the Grand Canal looks like. As you can see, it exists in rural as well as urban areas. Continuing, we're going to focus on the Song and the Ming dynasties. The Song was also important because of its economic development during this period and the expansion of early ripening rice varieties, which allows for the production of more food for more people. There are also important improvements in irrigation, food distribution, and land management, especially through cartography and the creation of maps that were very accurate for this period. The Ming Dynasty comes after the collapse of the Yuan Dynasty. The Ming established the capital in Beijing, and they continue that from the Yuan period. The Yuan, I believe, were a northern Mongol ethnic group that established the capital first in Beijing, and the Ming continued it there. This period is also known for the mariner Shang He. Shang He belonged to the government. He was in the Navy, mariner, a trader, and explorer. and he traveled through Asia, Southeast Asia, India, and East Africa, representing the Chinese dynasty of the Ming. And the Ming Dynasty also increased trade with the West along the Silk Road and the Maritime Silk Road. Okay, so that's it for the Chinese dynasties, and we're going to focus now on Japan. I just want to focus briefly on the physical geography of Japan. We should recall that Japan is composed by 4 large islands. The north is the island of Hokkaido. In the center, the largest island is Honshu. We also have Shikoku and Kyushu here in the south. We also have the Kanto Plain, and this is traditionally Japan's largest agricultural region because it's flat. We have a river here, and this has been the historic cultural, economic, and population core of Japan around the Kanto Plain, because it's a lot easier, of course, to build and to grow agriculture in a flat area. The center of the Kanto Plain has historically been the center of power, a central location between North and South Japan, important for the extraction of taxes from agriculture and population, as well as near fisheries. The Seto Inland Sea is also very important and helps contribute to the development of a maritime trading tradition in Japan between its islands. So having a navigable inland sea is very important for the development of trade. During the Tokugawa period, I fast forwarded in the period of Japanese historical development. I want to keep this lecture short. So I want to point out one of the most important periods in Japanese history before the modern period is the Tokugawa period from 1600 to from about 1600 to 1860. This is known as the Tokugawa period because the Tokugawa family held power in Japan during this period with their one ancestor after another. This period was known for its efficient bureaucratic rule and economy. Of course, the power was concentrated at the top with the emperor and his family, but we do see relative peace because most samurai and other warlords were pacified under one government. And so this is going to contribute to economic growth of the Japanese economy, especially along the Tokaido Road, which is a region that connects the capital Edo or Tokyo, which is the seat of government, with the cities of Kyoto and Osaka in the south, Kyoto being an important center of education, art, and religion, and Osaka being an important commercial seaport and entryway to the south. Here we're also going to see the first contact of European Christian missionaries. The Portuguese, for example, bring Christianity to Japan, but this also gives problems for the Tokugawa because some of the converts to Christianity no longer had allegiance to the local government, but they identified more with Christian authorities in the Vatican. And this is going to lead to several rebellions, but also attacks against Christianity. And so foreigners are only going to be allowed in the South Island and port of Nagasaki. That way the Tokugawa can still trade with foreigners, but they also decide and they limit the trade so that they don't take over and colonize like they have done in other parts of the world. And the Dutch become the important trading partners with the Japanese during this period. The Tokaido Road connects, again, Tokyo, so this Kanto Plain region, but also cities like Kyoto, and then Osaka. And Osaka, through the sea, is connected to this whole region here in the south. So this central area becomes the historic core of Japan. In 1850, the American General Perry forces Japan to open its economy through gunboat diplomacy with a more aggressive and superior navy. The United States basically forces Japan to open its economy to end its isolation. In 1868, the local ruling class is going to align with foreigners because they also want the economy to grow and industrialize. And they're going to overthrow the Tokugawa and establish the Emperor Meiji Mutsuhito and his family, who will become a figurehead, more of a symbolic ruler. What this is going to provide is an enriching period in the country, the strengthening of the military, and the pursuit of European and North American ideals of civilization and enlightenment. Especially what we're going to see during the period known as the Meiji Restoration is the centralization of the economy and the government along Western capitalist lines, where Japan is going to adopt and adapt the latest advances in technology and government, for example, in engineering from Germany and the US, governance and bureaucracy from Germany and the US, finance and banking from France and the United Kingdom, and military and industrial technology and strategy from the US. This is the period of rapid industrialization for Japan, where we're going to see the development of the railroad, the telegraph, and the steamship. If you have ever watched the movie The Last Samurai, it basically references this period in Japanese history, where the protagonist, of course, is in charge of conquering one of the last areas that refuses to modernize and come in to the fold of the new government. And so that's an interesting historical movie. Not the most accurate, but this is also the period when the company Nintendo becomes formed, and the company Nintendo begins as a trading card company, which will later on, much later in our modern era, is going to become a video game company. During the Japanese Empire, we're also going to have large industrial monopolies known as the Saibatsu, and their job is going to be to guide the economy and foreign policy. So basically, the capitalist ruling class is in charge of the government. Since Japan is poor in resources, Japan will also begin to use its newly industrialized military to colonize neighboring countries. And this is going to, of course, create a lot of tension and problems for East Asia. Looking at let's look at European colonization in China, especially because Japan is also going to become an industrial colonial power. The Qing Dynasty of 1644 to 1912 is basically a large broken up. It's a large empire, but it becomes broken up and weak by internal revolts, as well as floods and European colonization. This begins with the gunboat diplomacy of Europeans who parked naval vessels off the coastal cities and threatened destruction. The British East India Company, the French, the Americans, and the Germans all wanted access to Chinese markets. The British are going to be the first ones to forcibly open China to world trade through the first Opium War, where even though opium was illegal in China, it's a very addictive drug. The British forced China to open up and become and import opium that the British grow in India. And that way the British can get silver from China. We're also going to see ports that are open to Western interests and enclaves that become foreign-owned territories. In this political cartoon of the 19th century, early 20th century, we see world powers around a pie, and they are splitting up the pie, right? Here we have a caricature, very racist caricature of a Chinese person supposedly representing, right, the Mandarin class, the ruling dynasties. It might actually represent the empress of the period of the last empress of the Qing dynasty. And we have, for example, the United Kingdom through the Queen, Germany through the Kaiser, the Russian Tsar, the French Empire, and the Japanese Empire. And they're all trying to get a piece of the action. This is a French political cartoon. This is the type of colonization that we see. There's going to be an occupation of cities. Originally, the ones in the red, like Shanghai, Fuzhou, Guangzhou, become occupied. By this point, also the British take Hong Kong, the Portuguese have Macau, and we're going to see different powers open up ports like by 1865, and they will have major enclaves. Even Qingdao, for example, was German. The Russians tried to occupy, they occupied for a while Dalian, and later the Japanese, after the Russo-Japanese War, they take this region. Going back to Japan, though, the early 20th century is going to be a period of imperial expansion for Japan. And before World War II, Japan had not moved fully into China, but Japan had already occupied Manchuria in the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan. And later on, as the Japanese Empire becomes allied with Germany and fascist Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, Japan is going to move aggressively to occupy China, with carrying out massacres in Nanjing, also occupying Southeast Asia and kicking out European colonial powers, but then taking over these colonies as well as the Pacific Islands for themselves. And this is going to be the Pacific theater from World War II. Remember, Japan industrialized rapidly and was occupying the region for raw materials and colonies. The Japanese Empire had important victories, especially against Russia in 1905, and Korea in 1910, later annexing Taiwan. The Japanese Empire was short-lived but brutal, and during World War II and after Pearl Harbor, the United States engages Japan throughout the Pacific Ocean, fighting for islands, and then later on firebombs Tokyo very aggressively, and the United States drops atomic bombs in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima. This is definitely a very devastating period in world history, and we hope that it does not get repeated again, because nuclear weapons, of course, are very dangerous. We really want to avoid nuclear war at all costs. It can lead to the destruction of the planet and human civilization. Going back to China in the 20th century, as I mentioned already, China was occupied in the 19th century by foreign powers. By 1900, we have what is known as the Boxer Rebellion, which is when Chinese forces for the first time rebelled against the British. This was one of the first expressions of nationalism. Later on, China is going to have the Revolution of 1911, orchestrated by others, among them Sun Yat-sen, known as the father of the Republic, who launches a nationalist movement after 1911, but for a democratic republic when they get rid of the dynasties and call for a republic founded on three principles of the people: nationalism, democracy, and livelihood. And this establishes the Nationalist Party. Nationalist because they also want to kick out the foreigners. And this is going to be led by Sun Yat-sen, and after the death of Sun Yat-sen, it'll be led by Chiang Kai-shek after 1925. Meanwhile, on the left wing of Chinese politics, the Chinese Communist Party will be established in 1921, and later on Mao Zedong will emerge as its leader in 1935, supported by the USSR. We will see a civil war between the Chinese nationalists and the Chinese Communist Party, and in 1949, the nationalists will lose and they will flee to Taiwan, and the communists will win and rule China. This is the period since 1949. We have the split between nationalists in Taiwan and the Communist Party of China in the mainland. And so since this period, Taiwan has seen itself as independent of China. Under Mao Zedong, China experienced what is known as the Great Leap Forward, which is where they tried to have rapid industrialization and a movement of people into the cities. The rapid industrialization is not going to work very well. After 1956, China and the Soviet Union grow apart from each other after the death of Stalin, but we see the development of a personality cult around Mao Zedong in China and around Nikita Khrushchev in the USSR. Mao Zedong is also going to strengthen his power of the new political class through the Cultural Revolution, which is a rapid period of cultural transformation to get rid of class society. And the youth are going to go to the villages, try to educate the peasants, but the peasants are also going to educate the youth about life. This is going to produce mixed results, but it's only going to strengthen Mao's hold on the power in the party. We're also going to see the collectivized agriculture or people's communes, and that is not going to be the most successful strategy either. Okay, that's it for this section. I know it's a bit long, but I had a lot to cover. In the next section, I will focus on the politics and economics of East Asia.